This is Election 2020, New Mexico Senate District 35. I'm Fred Martino. KRWG Public Media and the League of Women Voters are pleased to present today's forum. The rules are simple. Candidates have up to 60 seconds to answer each question and should not mention their opponent in the answer. My co-host from the League is Bobbie Green, and we welcome candidates Neomi, Martinez-Parra, and Crystal Diamond. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Neomi, the first question for you, and here it is. In what ways, if any, should the tax system in New Mexico be reformed? Explain. Go ahead, Neomi.
I hear you. Sorry about that. First and foremost, I think that, taxes are always a big issue in New Mexico, and especially because we have higher taxes for big corporations. And I think that we just need to even out the playing field for taxes. I would like to see not just working families paying the highest taxes, but again, going back to big corporations to pay taxes as well.
Crystal.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm pleased to be endorsed by the New Mexico Foundation for signing the No Higher Tax Pledge promise for our hardworking families out there. I feel like legislators discuss tax reform year after year with little action. They've kicked the can down the road just as far as we can go. So yes, it's absolutely time for legislators to come to the table to reform taxes. The first thing I'd like to see is the removal of GRT. Gross receipts tax puts an unfair burden not just on New Mexico businesses, but on New Mexico's hardworking families, specifically our lower income taxes. I'd like to see that replaced with more of a sales tax. I also think we need to consider the tax incentives that we give to particular industries. We really pick winners and losers when it comes to industries in New Mexico, and we need to level that playing field. Additionally, while we're on the topic of taxes, I'd like to see the removal of Social Security tax. I think we place an unfair burden on our retirees for money funds that have already been taxed in the past. So.
Okay, and Crystal, you'll get a chance to talk more about that. Bobbie?
Yes, hi, Crystal. Should New Mexico continue to tax Social Security benefits? And please explain your answer.
Well, there we are. Absolutely not. I think in order for New Mexico to become a retiree destination, we're going to have to make some changes to that tax code. Let's completely remove the tax on their Social Security. They have already paid money in taxes on that hard-earned money. Let's remove it and make New Mexico a retiree destination.
Neomi, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, it's time to end the tax in New Mexico, places like our Social Security benefits. The state's tax on Social Security benefits is a form of double taxation. When New Mexicans receive their paychecks, the money that is taken out for Social Security is already subject to state income taxes. So New Mexicans pay income tax on the money they put into Social Security, and then they're taxed again on the benefits they receive. Golden years, not rusty years. As your state senator, I pledge to work on repealing the New Mexico Social Security tax.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, starting pay for teachers is nearly 20% lower in New Mexico as compared to districts in El Paso, which start at more than $50,000 a year. How do you assess efforts to make the state's salaries more competitive? Neomi, we'll begin with you.
First of all, if we want to retain and recruit quality teachers, we need effective policies in place. This will lead to student success, increased salaries and current trainings, education for teachers. Once again, this improves student success. In addition, we need to preserve New Mexico's three-tiered licensure system for teachers. Minimum salaries must be raised to reflect the cost of living increases.
Okay, Crystal.
Not only in Texas, but also we're not competing with Arizona. We need to stop exporting our kids. So if we want to educate our kids here and we want to keep our kids here to enter into the education field, we're going to have to incentivize them to want to stay. But I want to make this point. is that 60% of New Mexico's budget is already allocated towards education. So I don't know if it's so much increasing the dollars, it's just making sure that those dollars are properly spent. They need more money needs to go directly into the classroom and directly into the benefit of keeping good teachers here in Mexico.
Thank you, Bobbie.
Crystal, this one's back to you again. Are you satisfied with how much money was allocated to the Early Childhood Trust Fund in the 2020 legislative session? And can you explain your answer, please?
I can. So just like John Arthur Smith, who held this seat before me, I did not support tapping the permanent land grant fund. It's a permanent fund and certainly not a rainy day fund. So I understand the alternative that was proposed by creating that early childhood education fund. But here's the problem. It was feel-good legislation because the fund itself was immediately swept and there are no funds. So are we happy with the amount of money? No, because it made good headlines and it makes good policy platforms for pitching campaigns, but it was not funded correctly. In fact, there are no funds at all to support those efforts.
Neomi.
Thank you so much. As an experienced educator, I'm sorry, in my throat. My goal is to bring the voices of our children, parents, and teachers to the table, excuse me, when shaping public education policy in the state. And I will advocate for the full funding of education with an emphasis on teachers' pay and investments in the classroom. I support a 1% or more increase in the funding from the Land Grant Permanent Fund for early childhood education. I believe that we as New Mexicans, we need to invest in our children like we invest in private industries so we can go further and we can make sure that all kids have an opportunity for a high quality education.
Okay, Neomi, we'll let you get a drink there as we get ready for our next question, and we are going to switch topics as a matter of fact. The next question is, what actions do you support to improve the accessibility and quality of health care in New Mexico, if any? Neomi, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much for that. That was a good drink. Yes, I will work with local officials and stakeholders to bring more providers and investment in new healthcare facilities to our district. I believe that no one should have to travel hundreds of miles to talk to a specialist, and I will work to make telemedicine more accessible. We deserve the right to access healthcare before we get sick, and I will fight to make sure everyone has access to regular preventative checkups.
Crystal.
You know, sometimes I think that the divide in Santa Fe isn't so much Republican versus Democrat, but rural versus urban. And when we talk about healthcare, that's right on spot, right? I would like to see an increase in telemedicine, of course, and in e-pharmacy. But additionally, we need more brick and mortar facilities, especially for our aging population in the rural and remote parts of New Mexico. So actually, absolutely support the expansion. We need to address the challenges of transportation that we face, that the urban areas don't face. And I'd also consider maybe some incentives in bringing the providers out to rural New Mexico. Maybe that's to streamline their residency process, whatever it may take to incentivize practitioners and providers coming out into the rural parts of New Mexico to service our needs of our healthcare industry.
Thank you. Bobbie.
Yes, Crystal, again, what should the legislature do to improve the New Mexico economy and ensure job growth?
Absolutely. I will tell you in the interim, before the legislature even meets, the governor can make some steps to go ahead and improve our economy right now. COVID-19 has just taken an unbelievable toll on our economy. I'd like to see some steps that reopen certain particular businesses to get New Mexico back rolling. As soon as the legislature reconvenes, our number one jobs needs to be jobs. I think we need to invest in the private sector to make it easier for new businesses to set up shop in New Mexico, and also to provide the resources and to cut that red tape to allow the businesses here in New Mexico to really expand, to increase job opportunities here, specifically in the rural and remote parts of our southwest New Mexico.
Neomi?
I believe that we as a state government need to step up where the federal government left off. What this community needs, what our communities need right now, is for every level of government to work together with businesses and nonprofit industries to find local solutions that will work for us. So we need to support our community members and businesses to tap into service centers so that they can get what they need for their businesses. We've got a perfect partner in the SBDC and other organizations, but we all need legal services support for renters. We also need to tap into our considerable state resources, such as the Severance Tax Fund and the Land Grant Permanent Fund, to support our local governments. You know, Elizabeth Warren talked about early childhood education as an essential service. Well, what we've seen so far is that without daycare and school, our economy is toast. But these essential workers are our poorest paid. We need to treat them like the economic drivers that they are, and pay a living wage and free healthcare so that we can have the infrastructure we need to bring our economy back.
Okay, next question. Do you favor the legalization of recreational marijuana in New Mexico? Explain. Neomi?
Again, we need to diversify our economy. We have to do that. And I think that, yes, I do favor the recreational marijuana because it's going to bring lots of revenues. But I do also think that we need to keep in mind and be mindful that we need to protect our children and our youth while doing that.
Crystal?
I do not support the legalization of recreational marijuana, but I'm a big supporter of medical marijuana, and I would work to increase and to build that industry. I would like to see the licensing process streamlined. I would like to see conditions opened up to allow for more patient access into medical marijuana. Additionally, I want to note that I'm also a big supporter of the hemp industry. Now, we are just on the tail of our freshman year in New Mexico since that's been legalized. We had some challenges with our farmers and ranchers, but if we give it time and we put in the right investments and resources, I would also like to see that industry. I think it can bring a lot of good revenues and resources here to New Mexico as well.
Okay, Bobbie.
Crystal, this one is for you. Should it be legal in New Mexico for a physician to assist a patient in dying?
You know what? That's a very slippery slope, and the legislation that's been proposed in Santa Fe is very dangerously open-ended, very dangerously open-ended. But I believe that I'm guided by faith in everything I do, everything from campaigning to the way I run my life. So I have to say that as legislators, we are lawmakers, but we are not God. And it's very difficult for me to try to put myself or any lawmaker in a position where we get to choose who lives and who dies, or who has the right to kill and be killed. So I would oppose that right now based on my position in faith, and also because the legislation that's been brought forward has so many dangerous open ends to what's been proposed.
Naomi?
Thank you. Well, in our faith, we are taught that there is safety in numbers. In 2004, my father, a pastor, he battled lung disease, and many times we had to fly him out to Albuquerque because he couldn't breathe. The last trip to Albuquerque was his last. He nearly suffocated to death and ended up on life support. And after several days, my mother had to make one of the hardest decisions of her life. She called the elders of our church, family members, and physicians for counsel. My parents were married 50 years. He was the love of my mother's life, but she could no longer see him suffer anymore. And after counsel, she gave the doctors okay to euthanize. And I believe that my father would have much rather died peacefully than to suffocate to death. Decisions like ours was between our family, medical caregivers, and not politicians.
Okay, our next question, we switch gears now, and Naomi, will start with you on this. Do you support any adjustments to current gun regulations? Explain.
I support the rights afforded to Americans in the Second Amendment. Absolutely. Our Constitution is our guiding principle. But but we can protect the safety of our children and our loved ones without having to sacrifice our Second Amendment rights and due process. I support common sense gun control policies that keep guns out of criminal elements, protect children and the safety of law-abiding citizens, and improve background checks. The research is emphatic to ignore it. In America, it's easy for the wrong people to get guns, leading to unnecessary violence and death. Research shows that common sense public safety laws reduce gun violence and save lives.
Okay, Crystal, same question for you. Do you support any adjustments to current gun regulations? Explain.
Our Second Amendment rights are not up for debate. I support access and increased access to mental health here in New Mexico. I support youth programs that provide proper gun ownership education programs. But I've been endorsed by the New Mexico Council of Outfitters and Guides and also the New Mexico Shooting Sports Association because I'm a strong supporter of our Second Amendment rights, predominantly because New Mexico has such a strong tradition of hunting and shooting sports. And often the gun legislation that's brought forward threatens our values and our traditions that we hold so dear here in southern New Mexico.
Thank you. Bobbie.
Crystal, should New Mexico promote renewable energy? And if so, how?
New Mexico is already promoting renewable energy. Right here in Senate District 35, as you travel through, you'll see turbine farms that we have here and also solar energy farms. So we're already on the forefront of promoting renewable energy. My concern with renewable legislation that's been brought forward is, once again, it's feel-good policy. We recently passed the Energy Transition Act, but there are no accountable deadlines that were included in that legislation. And so there's no way to hold these providers accountable to make sure that we're meeting those mandates.
Neomi?
Thank you so much. New Mexico should not only join the movement toward clean renewable energy in America, it should become a leader in the movement. The renewable energy mandates recently legislated are an aggressive start toward addressing climate change. The state has to look closely at ways to prepare and train our workforce to transition from jobs reliant on fossil fuels to good paying clean energy jobs in the wind and solar industries. Climate change is real. Responsible legislative leadership is long overdue. Thank you.
Okay, our next question. What is the role of the state, if any, in abortion regulation? Neomi?
You know, I'm going to add that, I waited my entire life to have a baby, and I feel that pregnancy is sacred. When my husband and I got married, we were ready to plan our family. We had college, we had our home, we even had the dog. A few months later, I became pregnant and I had a miscarriage. And then over a year later, I became pregnant again. And one of our trips to our doctor visits, we had learned that there was a medical problem. And after counseling with our doctor, I had to make a very painful decision to evacuate or else bleed to death. I was numb for many years knowing I could never have a baby. But my husband and I are blessed to have our beautiful adopted daughter. And as a woman, that is between a woman and her doctor, and has no place in the legislature.
Crystal.
I want to be very clear that what some people are referring to as women's health care is nothing more than the murder of babies, and full-term babies is what's that. Right now we have outside special interest groups, including Planned Parenthood, coming in and really declaring war on New Mexico. We're already the abortion capital of the nation, but we're in a very interesting position now with what's going on federally. Because with the new nomination currently happening on the on the federal Supreme Court, there is an opportunity that Roe v. Wade is overturned. Now, if it's overturned, that would move the decision back to states' rights. And we have an abortion bill on the books from 1969 that bans abortion in the state of New Mexico. So quite quickly and quite easily, New Mexico may go from being abortion capital of the nation to actually outlawing abortion based on what's going on both federally and in the state right now with abortion laws.
Bobbie?
Crystal, Do you favor an open primary as a way for independents and decline to state voters to participate in primary elections?
Well, if we had an open primary, we'd still have John Arthur in his seat right now. I need to note, though, that we do have open primaries. That legislation just passed in the special session this very last summer. And so as of June, we do have open primaries in the state of New Mexico, in which independents and declined states, when they go to poll, will identify with one main party or the other, and they are allowed to participate in that primary election.
Naomi?
Well, this summer, New Mexico experienced a historical turnout for its primary election. According to the news reports, the 2020 New Mexico primary election was incredibly high at 40%, or 6 points higher than 2016 and 15 points higher than 2012. The Albuquerque Journal called turnout in the 2020 New Mexico's primary election the most this century. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, New Mexican partisan voters came out to vote in historic numbers. This record turnout had a major impact on New Mexico's political landscape, and unfortunately, independent and declined to state voters did not have a voice in that historical transformation. The results of the primary elections have changed the face of New Mexico's federal delegation and state legislature for an entire generation. Everyone should have a voice in their democracy. As your state senator, I will support open primary elections in New Mexico.
Okay, our final two questions deal with elections as well. Neomi, we'll start with you. What would you change, if anything, about the current campaign finance laws in New Mexico?
The current campaign finance laws in New Mexico, I think that are we talking about public financing?
Nope, that's not the question yet, but you can comment on that in your answer. This is kind of an open-ended question as to whether you would change anything about the current campaign finance laws in the state.
Well, I think that fortunately, because of our great Secretary of State enacted rules to shine a light on dark money and put elected officials' finance disclosures forms online, but until Congress and the courts repeal the Citizens United decisions, we're going to see an increasing influx in dark money from corporate and other special interests trying to influence elections. Even here in New Mexico, they want to silence the voters of good working families, and their tactics are not always the most clear and honest. So again, no, the Council for Competitive Elections got it wrong. Many of our contributions come from New Mexican donors and opposed to outside interest groups, and our average contribution in primary was $79, and the readership can verify the validity of that. But I think that we really need to look into this more, and I think it's time to sit at the table.
Okay, Crystal.
You know, unfortunately, I do support campaign finance reformation. Unfortunately, what happens not just in New Mexico but nationwide is that money influences election. It's unfortunately. In this primary race alone for this seat, Planned Parenthood was a major influencer, and it happens time and time again where outside special interest groups play into these smaller legislative races, including this seat here. And so I would like to see reform, absolutely, to limit the influence from outside and out of state money that goes in here. While we're talking about that, I want to commend the Secretary of State. If you have not visited our new website, it is very transparent. I think that's a step in the right direction to allow the public to understand who's funding these races and what we're spending our money on and where we're getting it. So kudos to them. All right, time for one more question. Bobbie.
Crystal, should we establish public financing for state elections?
You know, I'm on the edge on that. I think I would consider it. I would consider that for the same reasons, is to limit that outside special interest group money that comes in to influence these races. It is something, again, I've mentioned that the devil is always in the details when we talk about rule change or legislation change. But I think if we do it right, there's an advantage to that. There is a transparency that I think the public is entitled to. So I would consider that.
Naomi, what about you?
Well, I think that with strong transparency and accountability, publicly financed campaigns can strengthen democracy by broadening the candidate pool and keeping the dark money out of special interest groups out of our elections. We have some great examples of public finance campaigns here in New Mexico. We have our judicial races, Public Regulation Commission, and a handful of municipal races across the state already have public financing options for campaigns. I would be open to supporting legislation which broadens public financing to legislative and statewide races.
All right, thanks to the candidates in New Mexico Senate District 35, Neomi Martinez-Parra and also Crystal Diamond. We thank both of you, and thanks to my co-host, Bobbie Green from the League of Women Voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you very much for joining us. And we want to thank everybody at home as well for making public media possible. I'm Fred Martino. For all of us at KRWG News, have a good week.